In the dead of Colorado's worst blizzard, a faint cry echoed from a frozen ravine. Curled beside the child, a wounded German shepherd breathing shallow but shielding her fragile body. No one knew this was Hunter, the dog her family had once sold, now returned from the shadows. And behind him hid a secret that would shake the world. Hit subscribe now to follow our next emotional and suspenseful film episodes. The blizzard wasn't just weather, it was a living thing. It howled through the narrow canyons of the Colorado Rockies like some ancient predator unleashed from its cave, devouring roads, fences, and anything foolish enough to stand exposed. Snow churned sideways in the blackness of midnight, reducing headlights to dim, flickering ghosts. Wind clawed at the world, stripping paint from cabins and rattling window panes until even the strongest nails seemed poised to surrender. Inside the Carters' small wooden cabin at the edge of the forest, Daniel Carter jolted awake. The silence woke him, not the roar of the storm that had hammered their house for 2 days straight. Not the guttural moan of the wind pressing against the old timber walls like a freight train waiting to plow through. No, the silence. A wrongness in the air so sharp it sliced into his exhausted brain. The wind had stopped. Daniel sat up, breath held, body rigid in the darkness. His ears strained. Nothing. Just his own pulse thudding against the sides of his skull. "Sarah." His voice cracked. No answer. Beside him, the blankets were cold. Empty. He swung his legs over the edge of the bed, bare feet hitting icy floorboards, and staggered toward the door, heart pounding now. Each step echoed louder than the last, a metronome counting down to something he couldn't name. The front door stood ajar. Snow pressed in through the gap, curling like smoke across the threshold. The wind had snapped the deadbolt clean. Shattered wood splinters lay scattered across the cabin floor. Daniel stood frozen, staring at the broken lock, the snow creeping toward his bare toes. Then the scream pierced the night. "Daniel, Daniel," Sarah's voice, from outside. Daniel ran. The snow hit him like a wall, a suffocating curtain of ice and sound that stripped the breath from his lungs. He barely registered the thin pajama pants clinging to his skin, the shirtless vulnerability of his body against the sub-zero fury that consumed him. He followed the sound of his wife's voice, blindly stumbling into drifts that swallowed him to the waist. Then he saw her. Sarah collapsed on her knees, and the snow hair whipped wild around her face, nightgown plastered to her skin. Her hands clawed at the snow, shoveling it aside in frantic, meaningless motions. Her voice was gone, reduced to a hoarse, broken rasp as she gasped the same name over and over. "Emma, Emma, Emma." Daniel fell beside her. His knees struck frozen earth beneath the snow, but he barely felt it. He grabbed Sarah's shoulders, shaking her, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Where is she?" His voice didn't sound human. I woke up. The door was open. I thought she followed you. I thought you took her." The words broke apart as sobs took over. Daniel's mind refused to understand. He surged to his feet and ran back to the cabin, ignoring Sarah's cries behind him. His body moved faster than thought, crashing through the door, skidding across the snow-slicked floor and reaching Emma's small bedroom. Empty. The blankets on her tiny bed were twisted, half-dragged onto the floor. The window was shut. He checked the closet, then under the bed, though he already knew. She wasn't there. Daniel's vision tunneled. For a moment, the world narrowed to a pinprick of awareness centered on his own hammering heart. Then it exploded outward in raw, animal terror. "No!" He staggered backward, crashing into the hallway, then ran outside again, barefoot, blind. She's gone, Sarah." Sarah's sobbing became a wail, hollow and guttural, as if her soul itself had split open. Daniel grabbed her, pulling her up from the snow by sheer desperation. "We have to call them, now." Neither of them could think clearly enough to say who. Only that someone, anyone, needed to come. Needed to find Emma. Because every second she was out here alone was another second closer to something Daniel refused to let himself imagine. The sheriff's office responded in under 15 minutes. But to Daniel and Sarah, it felt like an eternity. First came Deputy Harlow headlights, flaring through the storm as his truck skidded to a stop in front of the cabin. His grim face went paler when Daniel explained. "A 4-year-old out in this." He didn't wait for orders. The radio crackled immediately as Harlow called for full mobilization. By dawn, every available deputy volunteer firefighter and search and rescue coordinator from the county had descended on the Carter property. Trucks lined the icy road. Flashlights bobbed in the darkness like a field of restless fireflies. Radios buzzed with clipped, anxious voices. Dogs arrived before sunrise. 2 K9 units from Grand Junction, their handlers silent, professional, their expressions carved from stone. The German shepherds strained at their leashes, eager to work. They were too late. By the time first light bled gray into the storm, temperatures had fallen to -4 Fahrenheit. and the wind chill made it worse. The blizzard had relented, but only just. Snowdrifts towered above grown men. Trees cracked under the weight of ice. Emma had been missing for 6 hours. Daniel stood in the center of the chaos snow, crusted in his beard. Lips cracked and bleeding. His hands trembled not from cold, but from the terror eating him alive from the inside. He watched them search. Watched them fan out into the woods. Watched them crawl through the drifts, their calls of Emma. Emma Carter. Can you hear me shredded by the still howling wind? He watched until he couldn't stand anymore. Until his legs folded and he sank into the snow, shaking, helpless. Sarah knelt beside him, clutching what remained of their lives, the stuffed rabbit Emma had named Mr. Blue, now damp and dirty, but the only piece of their daughter left in their arms. Time lost meaning. Minutes stretched into hours. The sun veiled by heavy clouds offered no warmth, only the indifferent march of daylight. At 10:14 a.m., Sheriff Briggs herself arrived. She was an older woman, battle-hardened, known for her calm in crisis. But Daniel saw it in her eyes, fear, not for herself, for Emma. She knelt in front of him. We're doing everything we can, Daniel. I know, but in this cold. She didn't finish. Didn't need to. Daniel nodded hollowly. Every local knew the truth. A child. Emma's size, dressed only in cotton pajamas, barefoot lost in these woods at these temperatures. Survival beyond 12 hours was almost impossible. Almost. And yet they searched. Every soul in that county. Every volunteer who could strap on snowshoes or ride a snowmobile or lead a search dog joined the effort. Not because they believed, but because they couldn't face the alternative. Each hour, each sweep of the grid returned the same verdict: nothing. No footprints, no dropped toy, no sound. Just endless devouring snow. By 2 p.m., the first searchers began showing signs of frostbite. By 4 p.m., a snowmobile overturned in the ravine, injuring a volunteer. Briggs faced a brutal choice. We keep looking? Daniel begged. His voice was broken glass. His knuckles were bleeding from where he'd clawed at the snow with his bare hands. Daniel, you need to understand. I don't. Briggs looked at Sarah, hoping for reason. Found none. The search continued. And as nightfall approached, bringing with it the second wave of the blizzard, everyone present knew the unspoken truth. They weren't searching for a little girl anymore. They were searching for her body. The storm closed in. And somewhere in that frozen wilderness, alone or not, Emma Carter waited. For rescue or for death. The night swallowed the world. He stood by the window and watched the snow fall like ash. Sarah sat on the couch, arms wrapped tight around herself, eyes red and hollow. She hadn't spoken in almost an hour, not since the search teams moved beyond their property lines. Not since Emma's name stopped echoing through the trees. Silence had become a weapon, and Daniel Carter was bleeding from every wound it inflicted. He couldn't look at her, not directly, not yet, but he knew it was coming. Sarah finally spoke. Her voice was brittle as glass. What aren't you telling me? Daniel flinched. It wasn't a question. She knew. Not everything. Not yet. But enough. Enough to smell the guilt rolling off him like smoke. I told you everything I know. His voice cracked mid-sentence, and he hated himself for it. Sarah laughed. A sharp, humorless sound that snapped the tension of the storm outside. Don't lie to me, Daniel. Not about this. Her hands were trembling. Her whole body was shaking. Part cold, part rage. You woke up last night before I did. I found you standing at the door, remember? Like you knew. I didn't. You knew. He closed his eyes. He could still hear the wind pressing against the cabin walls. Still feel the cold seeping under his skin. But none of that compared to what he felt now. Sarah stood closing the distance between them, with a suddenness that caught him off guard. She jabbed a finger into his chest, not hard but enough to make him step back. Where is she, Daniel? Where's my daughter? Her voice cracked at the end. The fight bled out of her, and she sagged forward, pressing her fists against his chest as if she could pound the truth out of him. Daniel caught her, held her, though she fought him at first. She pushed weakly at his shoulders, sobbed against his neck. And then, because he couldn't keep carrying it, he told her everything. I sold him. The words weren't enough. They were meaningless, hollow. Sarah pulled back confused. What? Hunter? Her expression changed, slowly. From confusion to something deeper, something darker. No. 2 years of buried guilt boiled to the surface, scalding him alive as he spoke. I didn't tell you because I couldn't. I thought it would kill you. After everything, after Emma. I couldn't. Tell me. Daniel swallowed. His throat burned. His soul burned. I sold him to a military contractor. Drone Tech Labs, out in Nevada. Sarah took a step back. Then another, as if she could physically move away from the words. Why? She whispered it. Not a question anymore. Just disbelief. Daniel shook his head. His voice broke again. We were drowning Sarah. You remember that winter? The medical bills? Emma's treatments? Your hours got cut at the clinic. My construction contracts dried up after the rock slide. He wiped at his face, though it did nothing. They offered me 20 grand, cash. Sarah's breath hitched. I told them no at first. But then Emma got sick again. We were behind on the mortgage. They called me Sarah. They called me. They said they were looking for specific breeds, specific temperaments. Hunter was perfect. He remembered the day too clearly. The white van pulling up outside their house. The men in gray suits, their smiles too smooth, their eyes too cold. Hunter wagging his tail, trusting Happy not understanding. Daniel choking back tears as he clipped the leash to Hunter's collar and walked him out to meet them. I thought they were just training him for search and rescue, Daniel whispered. That's what they told me. Military Canine Division. I didn't know. Sarah's fists clenched, her knuckles bone white. Didn't know what? Daniel looked up and said the words he'd never intended to say aloud, that they were experimenting on him. The silence hit harder than any punch. Sarah staggered back as if he'd struck her. What? Genetic engineering? Behavioral modification? I don't know everything. I swear to God, Sarah, I don't know. But when I signed the release papers, there was this clause. I didn't understand it then. But after a few months, I tried to get updates. I called them, emailed. They wouldn't answer. Sarah's face twisted in horror. You sold Emma's best friend to some lab experiment. Daniel's chest caved in. I didn't know. You let them take him. Her voice was steel now, cold, sharp, and deadly. You let them take him. And you let Emma believe he ran away. Daniel nodded numbly. Sarah shook her head, tears cutting down her cheeks. She cried for weeks, Daniel. Do you remember? She waited at the window for him every night. She kept leaving food by the door in case he came back. Daniel remembered. He remembered all of it. I know. His voice was hollow. And now she's gone. Her words hit like gunfire. You think this is punishment, don't you? Daniel blinked. Sarah stepped closer again, her tears forgot in her face, a mask of fury. You think this is karma. You think losing Emma is your payment for what you did. Daniel opened his mouth to deny it, but couldn't, because it was true. Every step of this nightmare, every second of Emma's disappearance had felt like a blade twisting inside him. And somewhere deep down, where he couldn't lie to himself anymore, he believed it was what he deserved. Sarah saw the truth in his silence, and she crumbled. She dropped to her knees in the middle of the cabin floor and sobbed into her hands. The sound wasn't human. It was animal. Raw, guttural pain that shredded the air. Daniel didn't move, didn't speak, because he couldn't. He'd destroyed everything, not just Hunter, not just the promise he'd made to protect his family, but the hope that Sarah would ever forgive him, the hope that Emma would ever come home. He sank down beside her, back against the wall, body trembling, mind spiraling into places too dark to name. Sarah's sobs shook the cabin walls louder than the storm. And Daniel, for the first time since the search began, let himself cry, because his past wasn't just a secret anymore. It was a sentence, and he knew when the snow finally stopped falling, that it would bury them all. Snow exploded beneath his paws. Hunter ran, not out of fear, not out of instinct, but purpose. A mission buried deeper than command, deeper than training. Something ancient. Something older than the genes they'd rewritten inside him. He wasn't running from them. He was running to her. Every muscle burned, every breath cut like ice in his lungs. But he ran, black against white. A streak of silent determination crossing the high ridgelines of the Colorado Rockies, paws finding purchase in powder where no human could follow. His breath curled behind him in sharp gusts vapor that vanished instantly in the 30 wind chill. He was dying. He knew that. The injuries from his escape hadn't healed, but it didn't matter. Nothing mattered now, except the scent. He could feel it even through the storm. Even through the wind and snow that buried all but the most primal traces. She was close. Emma, his girl, his reason. 70 miles away, inside an underground concrete facility, a red light blinked. Alert Asset 177B. Designation Hunter. Offline. In the control center, screens crackled with static. Lines of code scrolled uselessly. A man in a dark suit entered, coat still dripping from the rain outside. His badge read, Stryker. What the hell happened? His voice was calm. Too calm. A technician, young, sweating, terrified, turned from the console. Sir, he's gone. Stryker didn't blink. Define gone. We lost the tether at 0300. Biological suppression protocol failed. Neural override failed. You lost control of him. Yes, sir. Stryker nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Destination. The technician hesitated. We think he's headed back to the primary imprint. Stryker's jaw tightened. The child. The technician swallowed. Yes, sir. Stryker turned toward the others. Pull the entire recon unit from Nevada. I want eyes in Colorado. Now. Sir, with the storm. I said now. Silence. The technician clicked the comm. Outside, buried in the blizzard, black SUVs with government plates turned north tires, slicing through ice. Above, a drone pivoted silently in the snow-choked sky, infrared scanning for one shape. One heat signature. A single German Shepherd, Asset 117B. Hunter. Stryker watched the screens flicker, watched the lines of code crash into null loops. Then he smiled. He's going home. Hunter kept running. In the moments where the pain nearly won, where the edges of his vision blurred and his breath hitched, he thought of her. Her tiny hands in his fur, the soft way she said his name, her scent, the one thing they hadn't programmed out of him, the one thing they couldn't. Memory. They thought reprogramming neural pathways was enough. That suppression conditioning could erase his first year, his life before them. But the bond was older than their science, older than their control. She had been his before they ever touched him, and he was going to her, no matter the cost, no matter the death waiting behind him. At the edge of the storm, another vehicle joined the hunt. Not marked, not government. A black Jeep. Windows tinted to illegal darkness. Inside, 2 men and a woman sat in silence. Their equipment wasn't standard military. No insignias, no IDs. But they carried weapons the Army didn't issue. One of the men adjusted a headset, listening. Asset 117B has entered Zone 6. The woman beside him checked a screen. No official map. Just a pulse point blinking. Estimated proximity to the target, she asked. Within 48 hours. Orders. The driver, silent until now, spoke. Same as always. Which is no retrieval. The woman hesitated. You're sure? The driver's voice was flat. Orders are confirmed. Terminate the asset. A pause. And recover the child. Silence filled the Jeep. Not shock. Just inevitability. The woman nodded once. Understood. The Jeep accelerated tires, clawing at the frozen earth. Their destination wasn't the Carter family. It was what the Carter family was hiding. And none of them, not even Stryker, understood why the child mattered. They just knew she did. Hunter moved like a shadow across the snowdrifts. Behind him, the sky glimmered with movement, silent drones, unseen snipers. Men with orders he couldn't smell yet, but felt pressing down from the horizon. But he didn't stop. Not when the bleeding started. Not when his ribs cracked from the impact of the last jump over the ravine. Not when his body screamed that survival was no longer an option. He kept going, because somewhere under this endless sky, under this frozen world, a little girl was alone, and she was calling him, not with her voice, but something deeper, something he felt in the marrow of his bones. A pull stronger than the override chip in his brain. She needed him, and that was the only order that mattered. Inside the operations center, alarms blared. Stryker watched coldly as a feed came online. A thermal scan. One shape. Fast. Purposeful. He zoomed in, eyes locked on the blur moving toward the high valley near Cypress Ridge. Then past it. Straight toward Carter's Bluff. Stryker narrowed his eyes. He's not evading. One of the analysts turned confused. Sir, he's not running from us. Stryker pointed at the map. He's running to something. The technician glanced at the data. Then his face changed. Oh God. Stryker smiled. Exactly. He keyed the comm. Full blackout protocol. Deploy Raptors 3 through 7. Tell them lethal force authorized. A pause. Hunter is officially off the leash. And far ahead, past the killing teams, past the tracking drones, past the corporate death warrants Stryker had unleashed on him. Hunter ran. His heart hammered. His body broke. But his mind, the part of him that had once been nothing more than a house pet, a family's dog, a little girl's protector, held firm. The part they thought they'd erased. Love. Not emotion. Not affection. Not loyalty programmed by food or commands. But the raw, savage love of a guardian who knew without question that his child was out there. Alone. Afraid. And he was the only thing left that could save her. His vision narrowed as the storm thickened. Ice cut his paws. Snow blinded his eyes. His lungs burned like fire. But Hunter pushed harder, because he could smell her now. Not far. Not far. She was waiting, and nothing. Not the death they sent after him, not the cold creeping into his bones. Nothing was going to stop him. Not this time. Not again. Emma Carter stumbled through the snow. Her tiny legs shaking with each step, breath, shallow, thin pajamas drenched and freezing against her skin. She no longer knew where she was. She no longer knew when she was. The storm had erased everything: roads, trees, stars, and time itself. Only cold remained. And the voice. Not her mother's, not her father's, but his. Hunter. She heard him. Somewhere beyond the storm. Somewhere inside the storm. He was calling her name. Soft. Low. Safe. She kept moving. Her boots were gone. Torn off hours earlier, or was it days? Time bled strange here. Her bare feet pressed down into snow as sharp as broken glass, though she no longer felt pain. Her skin had gone pale, almost blue frostbite creeping along her toes, but still she walked. Because of the voice. Because Hunter was waiting. She couldn't fail him. Not again. Hunter. Her voice cracked like a broken doll's, and she remembered. Warmth. Before the cold. Before everything. Flashback. She was smaller then. Maybe 2, maybe 3. Time was different in memories. Hunter was huge. Bigger than she remembered. A mountain of warmth and fur and soft breathing pressed against her back as she curled into him on the old rug by the fireplace. Her little fingers tangled in his thick neck fur, his heartbeat steady beneath her cheek. Safe. He smelled like sunshine and grass, like the backyard, like home. Every night after Daddy told her Hunter had gone away, Emma dreamed of this. Not of the day Hunter disappeared, but of this night, of the safety. She never let go in her dreams. In dreams, Hunter stayed. Her legs gave out. Emma collapsed into the snow. She tried to rise. Couldn't. The blizzard roared louder now. She couldn't even hear her own breathing, but the voice, still there, still calling. Come to me, little one. Her eyes fluttered shut. And in that darkness, he came. Not in the snow, in her mind. Hunter, his eyes, golden, bright as the sun. His nose pressed against her cheek. Not cold, warm. She felt him, not like a dream, real. Where are you? She whispered, lips barely moving. I'm close. The voice wasn't words, not exactly. It wasn't sound, but she understood. She trusted. Don't go. I'm coming. Emma's body stilled. She believed. 5 miles away, Hunter froze. Every muscle locked. Every hair along his spine rose. His ears twitched, then rotated forward. The storm no longer mattered. Wind, cold, snow. None of it touched him now, because she had called him, and he had heard. Deep inside the rewired maze of his brain, past the neural suppressors, past the training, something primitive sparked alive. Connection, the last link. He stood still in the blizzard, head-lifted eyes burning gold in the night. He scented the air. Her, Emma. Not just a trace now, not just fading memory. A pulse. A beacon? Bioelectric signals readings. His altered senses could interpret, track, decode. Heart rate fluctuations. Chemical scent markers of fear, exhaustion, cold. She was dying. He could feel it. Hunter surged forward. Every step was agony. His lungs burned. His injured side leaked blood black against white. But he didn't stop. He followed the signal. Followed her, because she was calling him. And this time, nothing would stop him from answering. Back in the snow, Emma stirred, her body nearly lifeless. But her mind clung to that single strand of warmth. She whispered in her sleep, Hunter, come find me. Her breath shuddered, but her lips curled upward just slightly, because she knew he was coming. She felt it, felt him. Closer now, each heartbeat a countdown, to salvation, or to something deeper than sleep. The snow piled around her, burying her. Hunter closed the distance. Faster now, faster. Driven not by command, not by programming, but by the one law even science couldn't break. Love. And the voice of the child, who had never stopped waiting, calling. Come home. Emma Carter was no longer moving. From above, the blizzard howled its endless fury. Around her, the snow had formed drifts taller than she was. Her small form lay half buried in the whiteness, the faint rise and fall of her chest barely visible against the storm. The frost had turned her cheeks pale, lips blue. She didn't feel the cold anymore. She didn't feel anything. Then movement. A black silhouette exploded from the tree line. Hunter, every muscle burning, every rib aching. Blood mixed with snow across his flanks, but none of it mattered. Because they're her, the one thing he couldn't lose. Slow motion. Each bound consumed precious energy he didn't have. But his body moved on instinct, older than memory. Eyes locked on her. Not the snow, not the storm. Her. He reached her in 4 final strides, collapsed beside her, nose to her face. Alive. Faint, but alive. Her scent told him everything the storm had tried to erase. She was his girl. His heartbeat slowed as he nudged her gently, pressing his nose against her frozen cheek. A small sound escaped her lips, a whimper. That was all he needed. Then he heard them. Too late. Low snarls. From behind, Hunter's head snapped up, eyes narrowed. 7 shapes emerged from the white curtain. Not shadows, not nightmares. Real. Wolves. Lean, scarred, and starving after weeks of snow-buried hunting grounds. The pack had caught Emma's fading scent long before Hunter arrived. But now their hunger locked onto him too. Predators. Survivors. The largest, a black-furred alpha, eyes pale as glacier ice, stepped forward, head low, teeth bared. Hunter stood over Emma, his breathing ragged, his body failing. But his posture told the truth. This child was his, and they would not have her. The wolves circled. Hunter's lip curled back in silent warning. But the pack wasn't listening. Not anymore. One lunged. Hunter moved. No hesitation. Teeth met fur, flesh tore, blood sprayed black onto the snow. The first wolf went down screaming. But there were 6 more. They attacked together. A whirlwind of fur and fangs. Hunter spun. Bite. Rip. Lunge. But he was slower now. Wounds reopened across his side. His hind leg gave under him once, twice. Claws raked his muzzle. A bite sank deep into his shoulder. He ripped free, but it cost him. He stumbled. Another wolf slammed into his ribs, knocking him sideways. Hunter hit the snow hard, chest heaving. The pack circled closer. One paused to sniff at Emma. A mistake. Hunter surged forward with everything he had left. A snarl erupted from his throat, not from training. From somewhere deeper, he hit the wolf in the throat. The predator's windpipe crushed between Hunter's jaws. A kill. but too slow. Too late. Two more wolves tore into him from behind. He didn't feel the pain anymore. He turned, fought, bit, clawed, but his strength was gone. He dropped. Blood poured from too many wounds. Vision blurred. Hearing dulled. Snow drifted across his fading sight. The pack advanced. This was it. Failure. Not yet. Not yet. His body screamed to surrender. But he saw her. Emma. Still breathing. Still there. He would not fail. Not her. Hunter forced his broken body upright and did what no predator expected. He retreated. Not to surrender. To save her. In the storm's shriek, he found the cave. A narrow crevice between two slabs of stone half choked with snow. Not shelter. A tomb. Unless. He moved to her. Teeth gentle now. He lifted her as carefully as his trembling muscles allowed. Dragged her. Each step a nightmare. Each second another eternity. The wolves followed. Slow. Cautious. Scenting his death. But Hunter didn't stop. Not until he dragged Emma's body inside the narrow stone hollow. She fit. Barely. He dropped her gently onto the frozen earth. Then turned. The wolves watched from the shadows. Waiting. Hunter stood at the entrance. Blocked it with his body. He faced them one last time. Dared them. His legs shook. His body bled. His heartbeat slowed. But his gaze did not waver. Not once. The wolves paced. Then with the cold logic of survivors they understood. Not tonight. Not this fight. They backed away. One by one. Eyes burning in the snow. Until they vanished. Only then did Hunter collapse. Inside the cave beside Emma, he lay his head across her legs. Breathing shallow. Vision dark. Heartbeat slowing. But not gone. Not yet. He'd won. For now. And as Emma's small, frost-bitten fingers twitched in her sleep, brushing weakly against his fur, Hunter allowed his body to fail. Allowed himself to sleep. Because she was safe. And that was all that mattered. For as long as he could guard her, for as long as his heart kept beating, Hunter would stay. Her shield, her warmth, her last protector. Until the end. In a command bunker beneath the snow-choked peaks of Colorado, the walls pulsed with digital life. On the main screen, an infrared satellite feed displayed two life forms. One large, fading. One small, dying. Both marked as priority asset. Major Elias Crow leaned forward in the cold light eyes, unreadable behind wire-thin glasses. Asset 117B located, the analyst confirmed. Approximately 6 miles from last known civilian grid. Crow didn't move. Condition. Critical. The analyst hesitated. Both of them. Crow exhaled once through his nose. Update the team. At the back of the room, the tactical commander adjusted his comms headset. His voice was flat. Nightshade team, this is command. Target confirmed. Proceed to kill box. Static crackled. A woman's voice replied. Copy that. Crow watched the screen for a long moment, then spoke. Kill the dog. Silence followed. The tactical commander hesitated. And the child, sir? Crow's gaze flicked toward him. Impassive. Recover. A pause. Alive. Above them, Nightshade team moved. 5 operators. Black armor. No insignia. They moved through the storm like phantoms gear optimized for deep Arctic warfare. Silenced weapons. Neural disruptors. Combat drones trailing silently in their wake. But their real weapon was knowledge. They knew what Asset 117B was, and what it wasn't. Hunter wasn't a dog. Not anymore. He was Genesis Protocol's first failure, and their greatest threat. Inside the command bunker, Crow stood before the glass wall, overlooking the launch bay. Beyond the glass, the war machines of Project Genesis stood silent. Kennels steel and glass, each locked. Within each perfection, were dogs bred not from nature, but from design. Spliced genes, augmented cognition, enhanced resilience, pre-programmed instinct. But none were like 117B, because 117B was the prototype. He'd been the proof of concept, the first to survive neural integration, the first to bond. Crow's fingers tightened against the railing. He was supposed to obey, he said softly. Behind him, the lead geneticist said nothing. Crow turned. Tell me why. The scientist swallowed. Because, sir, bonding is unpredictable. No matter how deep the implants, no matter how precise the neural rewiring, affection cannot be programmed. Crow's stare turned lethal. Then why build him? The scientist hesitated. Because you ordered us to. Crow's silence was colder than the snow outside. In the distance, alarms pulsed silently. The screen showed a single line. Asset 117B off leash. Crow walked away. On the surface, Nightshade team pressed forward. Their leader, call sign Wraith, studied the readings on her wrist display. Target slowing. They knew why. Hunter's biosignature showed massive internal bleeding. Fractured ribs. Hypothermic decay. Dogs dying. Wraith said it without satisfaction. Without anything. The others understood. It didn't matter if Asset 117B was dying. Orders were clear. Terminate. At all costs. Because the asset carried more than classified DNA. He carried the project's deepest failure. The bond. And now with the child alive, Genesis had a second problem. Because Hunter wasn't just protecting Emma Carter. He was linked to her. Biologically, neurologically, psychologically. She wasn't random. She was chosen. The imprint hadn't failed. It had evolved. Wraith's voice cut through the comms. Orders from the satellite above. Crow's voice answered. Kill the dog. A pause. Recover the girl. Another pause. Do not let them reconnect. Wraith nodded once. Understood. Because if the dog and child reconnected, the control sequences embedded in Hunter's brain would collapse entirely. And then Genesis would have no control. Over him, over her, over the future. Inside the bunker, Crow reviewed the final file. Emma Carter, age 4. Imprint candidate, Lura 1B. Status active. He stared at the photo. A child. Small, ordinary, blonde hair, blue eyes. But somewhere in her genetic sequence, the keys to Genesis's next evolution waited. And if the dog reached her first, Crow closed the file. No mistakes, he said softly. Behind him, the technician whispered. Yes, sir. Crow didn't look back. Burn them both if necessary. Because Genesis couldn't afford another failure. Not now. Not when the project's greatest weapon was the very thing trying to protect a little girl lost in the snow. And far beyond their monitors, beyond the satellite feeds and kill orders in a cave buried beneath the storm, Hunter lay unmoving. His breathing was shallow. Emma pressed against his flank, shivered once in her sleep, then whispered, Hunter! The connection pulsed between them. Faint, but real. And above them, death drew closer. Snow crunched beneath heavy boots. Sheriff Mason Harper squinted through the endless white, the blizzard clawing at his face like needles. Every breath burned. Every second felt like time bleeding out of his hands. Then he saw it. Hold up, he barked. The search team halted. Mason dropped to one knee beside the shallow drift, where the wind had peeled back a layer of fresh snow. His gloved hand trembled not from cold, but from disbelief. A track. Clear. Precise. Not human. Paw prints. Too large to be wild. He stared. German Shepherd. He knew those prints. He'd tracked dogs before, but not like this. Behind him, one of the volunteers murmured, A wolf. No, Mason said, voice tight. This is a dog. More prints. A second trail lighter erratic. Small footprints. Child's footprints. But they vanished 20 yards ahead where the snow deepened. Mason's stomach turned. Get the K9 units here now. What is it? Sheriff the deputy asked, panting hard. Mason didn't answer, because he already knew. This wasn't just any dog. He remembered the stories. The Carter dog. Hunter. At the search perimeter, Daniel Carter's world collapsed. The sheriff's radio message felt like gunshots to the chest. German Shepherd tracks, near where Emma had last been seen. Daniel shook his head violently. No. Daniel. Sarah's voice cracked, almost broken. No, he screamed, fists clenched. It's not him. Sarah stepped closer, tears freezing on her cheeks. If it's not, then where's Emma? Daniel said nothing, because he knew, and silence was the only confession left. Sarah's body sagged. She looked at him, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. Tell me. Daniel couldn't meet her eyes. He didn't have the strength. Sarah's voice splintered in the storm. Tell me what you did. And then, like a dam breaking, the words came. Raw. Horrible. I sold him. The wind tore around them, but Sarah heard every syllable. I sold Hunter. Daniel's face twisted with grief so deep it looked like physical pain. We couldn't afford his surgeries. After Emma was born, after everything. I didn't know what else to do. Sarah stumbled back, shaking her head. No. I thought it was a military K9 program. I thought it was legit. They said he'd serve, that he'd be cared for, that he'd never feel pain again. And you let him go? Daniel nodded, unable to speak. Sarah's cry was wordless, a sound of betrayal deeper than language. The rescue teams watched from a distance, silent. Then Mason stepped forward. Sarah. She turned to him, desperate, furious, drowning. But Mason's voice was different, calmer. Listen to me. He gestured at the paw prints barely visible now as snow swallowed them. It's him. Sarah blinked, shaking. Mason looked directly at her. If that dog found your girl, his voice cracked, he won't leave her. The simple truth hit harder than any gunshot. Sarah collapsed into Mason's arms, sobbing silently. Hope, after all this time. Hope. Back at the command post, radios screamed. Words spread like fire through dry brush. A dog. A German Shepherd. The Carter dog. People whispered it in disbelief. The entire town knew the story. The missing family dog. Sold. Lost. Abandoned. Now he was back. Not to punish. Not to haunt, but to save. The idea fractured people's minds. At the diner, old men stopped talking. At the church, people prayed harder. In the streets, rumors spread. The dog was real. Hunter was alive. And he had Emma. But no one asked how. Or why. Not yet. Because hope silenced every other question. But not everyone was praying for the Carter family. Inside a black SUV idling 5 miles from the search grid, the nightshade agent known as Wraith watched her screen. Data scrolled. Thermal signatures. Intercepted radio. Small-town police codes were easy to crack. She listened as Mason Harper's voice played softly through her earpiece. Emma Carter, with a dog, a German Shepherd. A flicker of a smile crossed Wraith's lips. So the asset wasn't dead after all. Her orders updated instantly. Crow's voice whispered across the encrypted comm. Change of plan. Wraith tilted her head slightly. Confirm. 2 targets now. Wraith nodded. I understand. Crow's voice was cold. The parents. Objective. Neutralize if resistant. Wraith's smile faded. Copy. She closed the screen. Outside, the storm raged. She spoke once to no one in particular. Now we hunt them all. Then she stepped out into the blizzard and disappeared. Miles away, as the snow swallowed the world, Mason Harper stood beside Daniel Carter. "We're going after them," Mason said. Daniel didn't look up. Mason gripped his shoulder. "This isn't just your past, Daniel. It's my failure." "No," Mason said flatly. "It's your chance." Daniel finally met his gaze. "Chance for what?" "To save your family." Sarah approached, her voice shaking, but her spine straight. "If Hunter's out there, if he's with her, he's not protecting her because you deserve it." Daniel flinched. Sarah's voice cracked soft. "He's doing it, 'cause she does." Daniel couldn't stop the tears this time. Sarah whispered, "And I won't let your guilt take her from me." She turned to Mason. "Let's move." Daniel fell and stepped behind. He didn't know if redemption was real, but he knew one thing. If the dog he betrayed could protect Emma, then maybe, just maybe, he could learn to protect what mattered before it was too late. Silence. At first, Emma thought she was still dreaming. She felt nothing. Not the cold, not the pain, only a strange weight, a heaviness pressing over her small body. Then, warmth. Not from herself, from something else, from someone else. Her eyes fluttered open. Darkness, but not empty. Breath, heavy, shallow. She shifted barely, and the weight over her shifted too. A faint broken whine, then warmth against her cheek. Wet, a tongue. Emma blinked, hard eyes adjusting to shadows. Then, there he was. Hunter. She couldn't speak, couldn't believe, but her heart remembered, before her mind did. Tears welled. Hunter? His ears twitched, eyes half open, dull with exhaustion, but he saw her. He knew. Emma reached out blindly with frostbitten fingers, finding the thick fur at his neck. His whole body trembled, but he forced himself closer, closer. His muzzle pressed against her cheek. Another lick. Slow, gentle. Then he lay still again. His ribs barely moved. Emma understood enough. He was saving her, at a cost she couldn't understand. She tried to speak. Nothing came. Her throat burned. "Don't!" Her voice cracked weaker than the wind outside. "Don't go." Hunter's body, heavy as stone, shifted just enough for his head to nuzzle into the crook of her neck, as if telling her not yet. Emma's tiny hands moved instinctively. She held him, hugged his massive head to her chest. And for the first time in days, she felt safe. But that safety was a lie. Even in her young mind, Emma sensed it. Hunter was hurt. Badly. His fur, once golden and clean, was sticky. Wet. He was bleeding. She could smell it now. And when her hand drifted lower, her fingers came away black in the low light. Tears mixed with dirt on her cheeks. "Please." She pressed her face into his fur. "Don't leave me." Hunter stirred weakly. A sound barely audible escaped him. Not a growl. Not a bark, a whimper, but Emma heard the meaning. "I'm trying." Her small body trembled against his. But now, not from the cold, from fear, because in that moment Emma Carter understood. Her angel was dying. Outside the narrow stone crevice, the night changed. The storm had broken, but something worse approached. From the north, new shadows stalked the snow. A second pack, this one larger, hungrier, drawn by the scent of blood and death. The wind carried Hunter's weakness like a signal flare. The predators followed. Pale eyes gleamed in moonlight. The leader paused, scented the air, then lowered its head. Death was near, and tonight they would feed. Inside the cave, Emma clung tighter. Hunter's breathing was shallow. She whispered into his fur, childish, desperate. "I'll keep you warm now." She pulled her own broken body closer to his, tried to cover him, tiny arms wrapped around his neck, fingers buried in the sticky warmth of his blood-soaked fur. Her words cracked. "I'll save you." She believed it, even as she cried. Even as the cold crept deeper, Hunter felt her heartbeat against his skin. It stirred something deeper than pain. Deeper than instinct. A promise, one he couldn't let break. With what little strength remained, he forced himself to lift his head. He turned, eyes half blind. But he looked at her, really looked, and Emma looked back. A silent exchange. A covenant. "I'll protect you. I'll wait for you. Don't leave me. Don't give up." Hunter shifted his broken body, dragging himself forward an inch. Then another. He curled tighter around her, pressed his side over hers, shielding her, warming her, dying for her. Emma felt his weight heavy, crushing, and yet it was the only thing keeping her alive. She whispered. Again and again, "Please, please don't leave me." Outside, the wolves drew closer. Inside, the two of them lay locked in that fragile moment between life and death, neither willing to let go. Not yet, not tonight. Their covenant was made, and in the silent darkness of that frozen cave, the girl and the dying dog waited for morning. Silence didn't last. It shattered. Hunter's ears flicked. A sound. Wrong. Not the storm. Not wolves. Boots. Synchronized. Approaching. His breathing changed. From weakness to purpose. His body broken moved. Emma stirred against him. But Hunter no longer felt the pain. His mind overrode it. Training buried deep beneath instinct. No longer a pet. No longer a soldier. Only a guardian. Target protect. Objective survive. Emma's survival. His reason. His programming. His choice. Hunter forced himself upright. Legs shook violently. Muscles spasmed. But he stood. Barely. His body screamed surrender. His mind denied it. Because something was coming. Death. Human death. Less than 50 yards away, Wraith signaled her team. Thermal confirmed. 2 heat signatures. Cave structure. Minimal shelter. No extraction required. Prepare to breach. Nightshade team moved like predators. Silenced rifles. Electromagnetic nets. Non-lethal for the child, not for the dog. Asset 117B, as Terminal Wraith reminded them. Don't miss. Then she spoke softly into her mic. Crow, we're closing. Inside the bunker, Crow's lips thinned. Asset is expendable. Secure the girl. Wraith's reply was ice. Affirmative. She drew her sidearm. Hunting season. In the cave, Hunter's body failed, but his mind didn't. He moved to Emma. She was awake now. Blue eyes wide with confusion. Hunter. His tongue rasped across her cheek. Just once. Then he did something that shouldn't have been possible. He lowered his body, and using the last shreds of strength lifted her onto his back. Emma's small hands instinctively gripped the thick fur behind his neck. Hunter. What? He didn't wait. He moved into the storm, carrying her. One step, then another, then more. Slow, staggering, but moving. 20 yards from the cave entrance, Wraith caught movement. Target's mobile. Her voice snapped. Intercept. Nightshade team fanned out. Their HUDs locked onto the staggering shape moving through the snow ahead. One operative raised his weapon. Target's carrying the child. Negative fire, Wraith hissed. Intercept physically. We need the girl intact. 2 broke left. 1 flanked right. Wraith moved dead center. Seal the gap. Then she saw him. Through the storm. A shadow. Massive. Bleeding. Carrying a child. Eyes locked forward. Unstoppable. Even in death. Her breath caught. Impossible. But real. Hunter? Hunter ran. If it could be called running. His vision was gone. Only heat. Only scent. Danger. Behind. His ribs cracked with each breath. Blood poured from reopened wounds. But Emma clung to him, her weight insignificant compared to the burden he carried in his mind. Protect. 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 From what? He didn't know. He only knew the danger was coming. Closer. Nightshade closed. Wraith watched her team circle. Now. The first operative leapt. Net launcher primed. Hunter felt the shift. Sensed it. Reacted. Too fast. Too sudden. Training and instinct blended. He dropped. Rolled. The net fired over him. Missed. Second operative closed from the flank. Hunter spun Emma pressed tight to his back. His jaws flashed. Metal met flesh. A scream. The operative's throat torn open before the scream finished. Wraith cursed. Lethal. Lethal now. Operative 3 fired. Shock rounds. 2 hit Hunter's side. Electricity tore through him. His body convulsed, but he stayed standing. Another step. Another. Emma sobbed, her arms locking around him. Hunter, please. His heart seized. Stopped. Then restarted. He moved. Through sheer force of will. The fourth operative lunged. Taser spear. Hunter pivoted, sacrificing his wounded side. The spear drove into muscle. But he advanced anyway. Teeth found bone. Snapped it. The operative fell screaming. Wraith advanced personally now. Pistol raised. Laser sight painted Hunter's skull. Let go, she whispered, and fired. Mason Harper saw the muzzle flash from half a mile out. What the hell? He turned to Daniel and Sarah. Run. What? Run. Because he recognized gunfire. Not hunting rifles. Tactical weapons. And whoever was shooting wasn't part of his rescue teams. Somebody else was out there. Somebody hunting. Hunter moved. Not by choice. By programming. By will. By something more. The bullet tore through his left shoulder. But he didn't fall. Wraith fired again. Center mass. Hunter staggered. But his hind legs caught. Held. Then he turned. Wraith froze. The dog looked directly at her. Through the snow. Through the pain. Eyes burning. And he charged. Emma screaming his name, clinging to him. And for the first time in her life, Wraith felt fear. She fired. Again. And again. Bullets. Blood. Flesh tearing. But Hunter kept coming. 20 yards. 10. 5. Then he hit her. Full force. Bone shattered. Wraith's world exploded as she flew backward. Her pistol vanished. Her ribs broke on impact. Her mask cracked. And the weight of something larger than death pinned her. Teeth found her shoulder. Tore. Blood sprayed across the snow. But Hunter didn't kill. He left her because Emma was slipping. Her arms weak. Her heartbeat slowing against his back. She was fading. And he had to move. Now. He ran. Through the blood. Through the bullets. Through the storm. Carrying her. Chased by death. But outrunning it. For now. Behind them, Wraith lay bleeding, coughing up her own lungs, staring at the darkened sky. And laughing. Because the impossible dog was still running. And she knew something now. They couldn't stop him. Not with guns. Not with teams. Not with death. Asset 117B wasn't just a weapon. He was a promise. And tonight death would lose. At least, for a while. The storm died without warning. At 5:42 a.m., the first light of dawn pushed through the shredded clouds, casting pale silver across the blood-stained snowfields of the Colorado wilderness. And there, at the edge of the tree line, where death had tried and failed to claim its prize, they found her. Emma Carter, small, broken, and alive, curled atop the unmoving body of a German shepherd, soaked in blood. She lay draped across Hunter's massive shoulders, her tiny hands twisted in his fur as if even in unconsciousness, she refused to let go. The search team froze. No one spoke. Because they understood. They were looking at something impossible, something sacred. The child and the dog, together, at the end of everything. Sheriff Mason Harper dropped to his knees first. Jesus! His voice cracked. Then Sarah Carter screamed. Emma. Her cries shattered the morning silence, raw and uncontainable. She ran stumbling through the snowdrifts, falling more than once, but never stopping. When she reached her daughter, she collapsed. Her shaking hands reached for Emma's tiny face, her cheeks burning with frostbite. Emma stirred, fingers twitching, eyes cracked open, and a single word escaped her chapped lips. Mommy? Sarah broke completely. Tears rained down as she pulled Emma from Hunter's body, cradling her child against her chest, sobbing words of apology and love, and promises that no child should ever have to wait this long to hear. Emma's voice was faint, but she whispered, "He saved me." Sarah looked down at the dog, at the broken body that had carried her daughter out of the storm. Hunter didn't move, didn't breathe. Sarah reached out. Her trembling fingers brushed his neck. Cold, so cold. "No," she whispered. No, please." But there was no answer, only silence. Behind her, Mason signaled. Paramedics sprinted forward. Medical kits hit the snow. Oxygen masks. Thermal blankets. "Move," Mason barked. "We have a pulse. We have a live child." Teams surged. Someone took Emma from Sarah's arms. She fought, screamed, but Mason held her. "Let them work," he whispered. "They're saving her." But the dog was another story. One of the paramedics knelt beside Hunter. He checked for a pulse. Found none. He looked up, shaking his head. Mason swallowed. Sarah saw the look. She knew. She broke again. But then, a sound. Faint. A gasp. The paramedics snapped back to the dog. Fingers pressed deeper. A heartbeat. Faint. Erratic. But there. "Wait," he shouted. "Still alive. He's still here." Mason froze. Sarah dropped to her knees. The world held its breath. The paramedic moved fast. 4. Oxygen. Get the mobile unit. Now. Someone cursed. "We weren't ready for canine evac." "I don't care. That dog's breathing." Sarah's hands covered her mouth. Mason looked at the dying animal. At the dog that had survived hell. That had chosen to come back. For them. And he whispered, voice raw, "Hold on, boy." 2 hours later, the world found out. News helicopters circled the rescue site as national media descended. Cameras captured the images. The child. The dog. The story of the decade. Networks cut from politics, sports, and weather. America watched. The world watched. But behind the images, in a locked medical bay, at Gunnison Regional Hospital, a different story unfolded. Because while Emma recovered in intensive care, and Hunter hovered between life and death in a separate operating theater, Daniel and Sarah Carter sat inside a windowless room, facing the enemy they couldn't outrun. The men wore black. They carried no badges. Their faces were expressionless. One slid a file across the table. Another locked the door. "We need you to listen carefully," said the one who spoke. Daniel stared, didn't blink. Sarah clutched his hand, her body trembling. "You've both seen too much," the man said. His voice wasn't angry, just final. "The animal is part of a classified military development program." Daniel's throat closed. Sarah's nails dug into his skin. "Deniable assets like 117B were never intended for civilian interaction." 117B? Sarah whispered. "Hey, Hunter." The man nodded. His tone didn't change. "Your dog is government property. You are not authorized to disclose its existence, training, or operational details." He pushed a sheet of paper toward them. A contract, a waiver, and a check. Daniel's voice cracked. "What is this?" Silence. The agent's eyes were dead. Non-disclosure. "In exchange for compliance, your family will be protected. Your daughter's medical care fully covered. A relocation package is also available." Sarah's body jolted. Daniel stared. Then something shifted. Broke. He pushed the paper back. "No." The agent didn't react. Daniel's voice shook. "You want us to lie?" The man folded his hands. "You want your daughter to live?" Daniel froze. Sarah gasped. The man leaned forward. "Then sign." Daniel's soul cracked. His world shrank. Then he looked at Sarah. And for the first time in months, maybe years, he saw her clearly. Not broken, not desperate, but strong. Her tear-streaked face trembled, but she shook her head. And Daniel understood. He turned back. "I'm not selling my family again." The man blinked. Daniel's voice broke. "I sold that dog once." His throat closed. "And he came back to save my daughter." Silence. Daniel's voice turned to steel. "I won't betray him twice." The agent's face finally changed. Cold fury. "Understand what you're doing." Daniel held his gaze. "Yeah." And for the first time, he meant it. The man stood. "We'll be in touch." Then they were gone. Daniel collapsed. Sarah caught him. They held each other as the tears came. But in the chaos of their broken world, one thing was finally clear. They were done being afraid. Because their daughter lived. Because their dog had come home. And because some debts could never be paid. Only honored. In the surgical wing, the machines beeped. Steady. Stronger. Hunter's heart beat on. The war wasn't over. But he was still here. Waiting. For the little girl whose name he remembered. Even when everything else had been taken. Even when death came calling. He waited. Because loyalty never dies. And neither did he. Silence hung over Gunnison Regional Hospital. Too perfect. Too still. Inside ICU room 12, Emma Carter slept. Small, pale, but alive. Monitors hummed their steady rhythm, tracking her fragile recovery. Across the room, Hunter stirred. Barely. Wounds stitched. Body exhausted, but his ears twitched. His breathing changed. Something was wrong. His body still failed him, but his mind sharpened. Enemy. Close. Downstairs, Daniel Carter recognized the sound too late. Boots. Military. Unmarked. And guns. Real guns. This wasn't the evacuation team the hospital had been promised. This wasn't rescue. It was a hit. Sarah grabbed his arm. Daniel. He turned, saw her eyes, and knew they were here for Emma and for Hunter, the family he had betrayed once. He wouldn't do it again. In the main corridor, Sheriff Mason Harper locked eyes with Crow. Recognition, shock, then fury. Crow in full tactical gear advanced without breaking stride. You're obstructing a classified operation. Harper stepped forward. You've got no jurisdiction. Crow's tone was ice. I don't need jurisdiction. Behind him, black-clad operatives moved into position. Hallway sealed. No cameras. No witnesses. That was the plan. Until Hunter moved. In ICU room 12. Hunter's eyes opened. Fully. The ember light returned. His body betrayed him. His muscles refused. But his mind didn't. He forced his ruined body upright. His paws trembled against the floor. Nails scraped tile. Emma stirred. Sensed him. Hunter! Her whisper cracked. But he heard her. He looked at her. Then toward the door. Toward the danger. Enemy. Emma. Protect. Downstairs, Harper refused to back down. This is a hospital. Crow's reply was calm. Not anymore. He raised his weapon. Harper's hand twitched toward his holster. But Crow was faster. He fired. One round. A warning shot. The bullet embedded in the wall, an inch from Harper's head. I said, stand down. The air split with tension. Daniel stood frozen. Sarah beside him. Then the alarm blared. Security breach. Room 12. Crow's comm crackled. Sir, the doggies. Then screaming. From the third floor, Crow's face changed. Move. Hunter came for them. Not fast. Not clean. But unstoppable. The door to Emma's room shattered. An orderly screamed. Hunter ignored him. He followed the scent, the heat, the threat. His body leaked blood. Every movement tore open fresh wounds. But he didn't care, because Emma was awake now. She cried his name, and he would answer. Third-floor corridors erupted. Hospital staff fled. Patients were locked down. And in that chaos, black-clad operatives advanced toward room 12. Contain the asset. Then Hunter hit them. A blur of rage and pain and memory. Teeth tore into flesh. Blood hit white walls. Guns fired. Bullets hit him. Again and again. But he didn't fall, because Emma's voice pulled him forward. And because Daniel Carter, arriving seconds behind, saw it all. Saw the dog he had abandoned once, now dying for his daughter. And something inside Daniel shattered. Hunter. He ran. Not from. Toward. For the first time, he ran toward his failure. To fix it. Sarah found Emma in the chaos. Held her. Shielded her. But Emma pointed past her. To the blood. And the dog. Help him. Crow advanced through the firefight. He saw Hunter. The monster he had helped create. Put him down. But his men hesitated. Because killing a dog that refused to die didn't feel like victory. It felt like betrayal. Hunter kept coming. Wounds gaping. Ribs visible. And yet he fought. Then Daniel arrived. He grabbed Harper's sidearm. The sheriff didn't stop him. Daniel advanced into the gunfire. To Hunter. The dog saw him. And for a moment, Hunter hesitated. Recognition and something else. Daniel knelt, met his eyes, and whispered, I'm sorry. Then he turned, gun raised, and fired. Not at Hunter, at the men trying to kill him. Daniel Carter chose his side. At last. Bullets tore through black armor. Crow's men fell. The hallway descended into chaos. Harper's deputies arrived seconds later. More guns. More confusion. Crow was trapped. His operation compromised. And the press had arrived. Cameras caught the final exchange. Crow pinned behind a gurney. Daniel shielding Hunter. Sarah and Emma surrounded by medical staff. Helicopters circling above. News outlets broadcasting live. And Crow realized it was over. Hunter stood, one last time, beside Daniel, his enemy, his friend, the man who had failed him, but now fought beside him. History and redemption collided in blood and gunfire. Daniel looked down at Hunter. I won't leave you. Hunter's eyes closed. Trust. Then Crow dropped his weapon. The cameras caught that too. Transmission beams hit networks nationwide. The world saw the truth. Project Genesis, government betrayal, a dog's loyalty, and a family's redemption. Live and undeniable. Hunter collapsed. Daniel caught him, held him, as sirens wailed, as agents were arrested, as Crow was dragged away, as the world learned what love meant, not from men, but from a dog who refused to let go, even at the end. They called it the anomaly. In the declassified files that hit public servers at 3:14 a.m., Project Genesis referred to the phenomenon as imprint response failure. But it wasn't failure. It was love. Inside ICU room 12, the war was over, but the aftermath was just beginning. Sarah Carter sat beside the hospital bed, her fingers tangled in the fur of the broken animal who had saved their daughter. Hunter. He was more scar than skin now, breathing shallow, heartbeat erratic, but alive. For now. Across the bed, Emma slept. One small hand rested on Hunter's muzzle, her fingers twitching in sleep as if still holding him, even in dreams. Sarah whispered into the silence. "You're not a weapon." Her tears hid his fur. "You're not a project." Her voice broke. "Your family." Daniel sat outside the room, his body hollow. Guilt devoured him. But the screen on the wall demanded his attention. CNN, Fox, BBC. Every station in the world streamed the same footage, the same revelation. Project Genesis wasn't just a military program. It was a betrayal of nature. A program designed to engineer perfect guardians. Biological protectors imprinted onto targets as children. Children like Emma. A government official explained, her voice shaking. Genesis was a biodefense initiative designed after 9/11 to protect high-value civilian targets. Biological units, dogs primarily, were modified at genetic and neurological levels to bond at the neonatal stage. She swallowed. Her gaze flickered to the cameras. Each unit was programmed with a single directive. Imprint. Protect. At any cost. Her voice cracked. What we didn't anticipate was choice. In Emma's hospital room, the explanation no longer mattered. Sarah already knew. She could feel it, in the way Hunter reacted whenever Emma whimpered, in the way his failing heart fought every second to stay alive, because Emma still needed him. And Emma, even unconscious, her vital signs stabilized when Hunter was near. Dr. Lisa Grant, head of pediatrics, confirmed it. Separation causes autonomic destabilization in both the child and the animal. In simpler terms, Emma's body shut down when Hunter wasn't close. So did his. The term Project Genesis called it biolink dependency, but Sarah called it something else: love. Reporters outside the hospital framed it as scandal, but inside ICU room 12, Daniel finally understood the real story. Hunter had imprinted on Emma when she was an infant. He had been designed for that, engineered for that. But then, when Daniel sold him to the military, Hunter didn't forget, couldn't forget. Emma wasn't just a target. She wasn't a mission. She was his girl, his reason. So when danger came, when the storm rose, and Emma called out in her sleep, Hunter heard, and nothing, not the needles, not the shock collars, not the years of military programming, could override the most human thing buried inside him: his love for her. In the declassified documents, there was a name for Emma: Target Alpha, the first human subject, the genesis of Genesis. Because when Hunter's imprint bonded successfully to her, the project's viability was proven. She had been the prototype, the blueprint, but nobody told her parents. Nobody told Daniel. Until now. Sarah collapsed onto Hunter's body, her sobs silent. "I'm so sorry." Daniel stood in the doorway. His voice cracked. "So am I." He crossed the room. He knelt beside Sarah, beside Hunter. His hand joined hers on the blood-stained fur. The dog twitched. A faint broken sound escaped him. Daniel's tears fell. "I thought I sold a dog." His voice cracked. "I sold my daughter's guardian." Hunter's ear flicked. He recognized the voice, even after everything. And Daniel Carter, the man who once left him to be experimented on, whispered the only words that mattered. "Come home, Hunter." Hunter's breathing slowed. But not from death, from peace. Outside, the world erupted. Protests, media storms, congressional hearings. Project Genesis was dead. Its architects disavowed, and its remaining units, less than a dozen, were located and scheduled for decommission. But that wasn't the end of the story, because one unit refused to die. At 3:26 a.m., Emma woke. Her first word, "Hunter." Sarah leaned over her. "He's here." Emma's voice broke. "Don't let him go." Sarah cradled her. "I won't." Emma's tiny body trembled. "He called me." Sarah blinked. "What?" "In my dream." Emma's voice was soft. "Hunter called me. That's why I walked. He said, I'm coming." Daniel's heart fractured. Sarah held her tighter. "And Hunter?" Eyes closed, lips twitching, responded. A sound, a whimper. But not from pain, from recognition and hope. Doctors watched, bewildered. The neurological link between child and dog defied everything. Monitors displayed Emma's heart rate, mirrored by Hunter's. Her blood pressure, mirrored by his. They called it synced trauma recovery. But the truth was simpler. They were connected. Forever. Hunter wasn't a project. He wasn't a mistake. He was Emma's. By design. By choice. By love. 2 hours later, the Secretary of Defense issued a formal apology. But Daniel Carter ignored the speech. He sat beside the dog he once betrayed. And he promised, "You'll never be alone again." And for the first time in years, Hunter rested. Safe. Home. Family. Where he belonged. Sunlight filtered through the pines. The snow had melted. Not completely, but enough. Enough to remind the Carter family that storms ended eventually. Life went on, even after everything. Hunter lay stretched in the sunlight behind their new house. A small place. Simple, but safe. A place without secrets, without shadows, only warmth, and the sound of laughter. Emma's laughter. She ran across the yard, barefoot hair, wild cheeks flushed. Her small arms opened wide as she threw herself against Hunter's side. The dog grunted softly, a sound more human than animal, and rolled, letting the little girl pin him down, pretending to lose. Because that's what family did. Daniel stood on the porch, silent, watching, his heart both whole and fragile. Beside him, Sarah wiped tears from her cheeks. Daniel's voice cracked. Do you think he knows? Sarah didn't look away from the scene before them. Knows what? Daniel swallowed hard. That we're sorry. Sarah's hand found his. I think he knew before we did. 3 weeks earlier, the question had nearly destroyed them. Hunter's body had healed. Scars hidden beneath new fur. Muscles regrown. Vital signs stable. But officials from the Defense Department arrived anyway. They didn't care that Hunter was Emma's guardian, or that he had saved her life. They saw only a loose asset, a compromised military project. They saw property, not family. Daniel remembered the conversation like a wound. A man in a black suit, polished shoes sinking into the Carter's muddy driveway. You know the terms, Mr. Carter. Daniel's jaw clenched. I didn't sign anything. Ownership isn't the issue. Genesis units are federal assets. He's not a unit. The agent's eyes remained cold. He's not your dog. Daniel's voice dropped lower. He's not your anything. At first they threatened. Then they offered money. Freedom from debt. New identities. A clean slate. All they wanted was Hunter. Daniel laughed in their faces. Sarah screamed at them. Even Emma, standing behind her mother, shouted the only words she understood. No, he's mine. What changed everything wasn't the Carters. It was everyone else. The town of Gunnison refused. Pastors, mechanics, teachers, people who had once blamed Daniel now stood between him and the government. Local police took a stand. Journalists amplified the story. America fell in love with the dog who refused to die, and the child he chose to protect. Petitions flooded every level of government. Protect Hunter. Let him stay. He earned it. Millions of signatures. Crowds outside the hospital. Signs reading, family isn't property. Dogs choose too. And Emma's own words printed everywhere. Hunter came home because he loves us. The federal order to retrieve the asset was rescinded 48 hours later. Daniel stood outside his home when he got the call, an exhausted voice on the other end. You win, Mr. Carter. Daniel said nothing. He didn't need to, because Hunter standing beside him had already told the world. Some loyalties aren't programmed. They're chosen, and now life felt possible again. In the backyard, Emma giggled as Hunter rolled to his feet. He moved carefully, slower than before, but each step steady. The scars remained, but he wore them like badges. Emma flopped against his side. Hunter led her, his ribs expanding slowly with breath. Peaceful, alive. Daniel whispered beside Sarah. I sold him once. Sarah's voice was soft, but he came back. Daniel shook his head. No. He chose. His voice broke. He chose us. Emma knelt beside Hunter. She leaned close. Her small voice was almost lost in the breeze. But Daniel and Sarah heard it, and it was enough to shatter whatever was left inside their hearts. She said, Hunter came back. A pause. Because he loves us. Hunter closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he slept without fear. Because home wasn't the place. It was the people. And for him, it would always be Emma. The girl who never forgot him. The family who finally remembered. And the choice he made. To protect. To forgive. To love. Because that was who he was. Not a soldier. Not a project. Not a weapon. Just a dog who came home. Because love is the choice that makes us free. Forever.